Hi, everyone. I'm Julie Hayworth-Pearman with NC State Extension Marketing and Communications. So happy to be talking with you today. I wish it could be in person, but I guess we're all getting used to virtual trainings and Zoom meetings and all of the really challenging things that have come with this pandemic. Today, we're going to talk about planning and developing stories for Extension. I hope we can impart some good knowledge for you, and certainly Justin Moore and myself are here for you with any questions that you have. My contact information shows up on a later slide, and let's just get started. I will apologize in advance for any background noises you may hear because I am home with kids, as many of you probably are as well. So here we go. Today we are going to go over several topics. First of all, we're going to talk about why we tell stories and what makes story important to Extension as an organization. We'll define what an Extension story is to help you better identify what stories you want to tell. We're going to talk a little bit about outcomes versus impacts. This is something that is not only good for stories, it's actually good for various reports you may be writing, things that you have to share with administration or within your counties. And then we will quickly run through some story development steps. This is a link. You're going to see it a few times in this presentation, and this takes you to our Extension storytelling resources online. From there, you can also get to some marketing resources, which I'll reference later on. But there's just a lot of good stuff. If you'll take some time to check this out and see what all we have to help support you with your work. So why do we tell stories? If anybody in this group is a fantasy buff, if you like to read science fiction or fantasy, I highly recommend Kate Forsyth. She's one of my favorite authors. And this is something that she said that really struck a chord with me. Stories and storytelling are an essential element of what it means to be human. Stories help us make sense of the world and pass on universal lessons and wisdom. And this is the whole point, I believe, that we want to talk about stories. It helps people to have a framework, a way to understand what what's going on and why things are important, and it just helps them to remember and all of those wonderful things. So here's my example of that. You may be able to see kind of what this actually is, hopefully not too soon, but I want you to think about this dot to dot as data points. These are the numbers, the facts and the figures that ultimately prove that your program perhaps is a really good investment or a great way to spend time. What story does is to connect those dots and help people understand the bigger picture. So now you can tell for sure that this is Mona Lisa, whether you may have just guessed that earlier. But story is really what connects those data points and gives them meaning. And I would even go so far as to say that good stories, if you were to use some coloring pencils and fill this in, good stories make that even more clear. So great detail, wonderful characterization, all of those great things that we love about the books that we like to read, or the things that we remember that we've seen in the paper or in the online news. Story is what helps us get there. So when we talk about an Extension story, there's real reasons for us to do that. So first and foremost is to bring that data to life, make it relatable so people understand it. We also want to make emotional connections. People remember how you make them feel. I believe Maya Angelou had a wonderful quote that kind of gets to that. But ultimately, if people can connect with you on an emotional level, they're going to remember a lot more, they're going to care a lot more. We also use story for Extension to reinforce key information and issues. We make our work memorable, leave a lasting impression, and if we're doing it well, we're always growing the Extension brand. So what is an Extension story? An Extension story is an intentional, strategic message that's rooted in our mission to grow North Carolina. So our brand promise is enriching the lives, land, and economies of North Carolinians. We grow North Carolina. Everything that we tell in an Extension story should push us in the direction of this brand promise. If we're doing it well, we're always going to leave this impression. We have developed a story rubric to help you write a solid extension story, to help you think through the things that make a story something people are going to want to read. So 4 points that extension stories should at least hit: 1, most often probably 2 or 3 of these. But the things that we try to do with an extension story are: number 1, highlight our people, showing our expertise, showing that we're the best in the business, the most reliable, all of that. We want to convey the breadth and value of our partnerships. So I am currently working on a story about 4-H camps and State Employees Credit Union. It's a grant story, but we're using it in a broader way. So partnerships are often very important and a great way to extend your reach in terms of who you can talk about the organization to. We also want to demonstrate trusted research-based resources and programs through our extension stories. And ultimately, experiential learning and individualized solutions are something that we always want to highlight. So again, this is the URL for finding our storytelling information. And there is this worksheet there that you can take and use as you're developing your next story. So impacts and outcomes. I apologize for how this slide looks. I tried many different ways to fix it, and I even had some professional help to try to fix it. But when I put the presentation in that presentation mode, it gets fuzzy. So forgive me for that. But an outcome is a short-term or a long-term response. An outcome is when something's been learned or an action has been taken. So there's new knowledge attained, you've changed an attitude, someone has picked up a new skill. In the medium term, you've created some behavior change, which is a very desirable outcome, of course. You've changed a practice or a policy. So basically, outcomes are: what have you done lately? They're much easier to report on, and the facts generally kind of lay that out pretty clearly. What we want to really convey as we talk about outcomes is the long-term impact of what we do as extension. This is where we make the biggest difference. This is where our policymakers and stakeholders and decision makers, this is what they want to see. So a long-term impact is a change in condition. This could be economic. So instead of, a behavioral change might be that someone's shopping smarter and they're saving some money on their grocery bill and they've improved their health outcomes as a result. The long-term impact would be, if I can reach X number more people like this person, that's going to exponentially change the overall impact of my program. We're going to start seeing cost savings on a community basis. Health outcomes at a macro level are going to be greatly improved. And I think sometimes what's really hard for us with extension when talking about long-term impacts is that they're not necessarily numbers we have now. They're not as easily defensible in that way. But we can be very realistic in projecting what the long-term outcome will be. Think of it as a hypothesis, if that helps. You are simply saying, we can have this kind of impact if we continue this work. That could be economic, that could be societal, could be an environmental change. So for example, if you're teaching programs to help farmers get rid of pesticides, you can talk about the long-term environmental impacts on correct disposal of those pesticides, how that will help agriculture in that county in the future and so forth. So long-term impacts answer the question, why should this matter? Connecting and supporting local goals is really important when we start thinking about storytelling. So this is, I apologize, my cat decided to visit. This is an overview of NC State Extension's and Cooperative Extension's marketing planning process. There are 8 points here that will ultimately, when they're answered thoroughly by your team, establish a marketing plan for you. So take a look at the URL here. You can go straight to a workbook that takes you through all of this, but we would strongly encourage you, if your county has not done this exercise yet, that you talk with your CED or you talk with your fellow agents and staff and say, hey, let's really sit down and think about the goals we want to accomplish as a group. And that's going to drive a lot of the stories that you're going to ultimately want to tell. So take a look, spend some time with it, and if you need help with marketing planning, please give me a call. All right, the most important thing when it comes to telling an extension story is understanding why you're telling it in the first place. So ultimately, what do I accomplish by sharing this information, by telling this story? What do I want to have happen as a result? So perhaps I'm seeking funding, or perhaps I'm trying to share impacts for sustainability reasons. Maybe I want to just simply increase participation in programs that I'm offering. But by telling this story, what do you want to have happen? Once you kind of figure that out, you're thinking about what story you want to tell, we go through this story development process. We're going to focus on 1 and 2 today. So defining and developing your story. I'll skim over deliver and measure. It's not quite as applicable to what we're talking about today, but I will present that information in shorthand so that you can understand it a little bit. So first we define our topic, make it very clear. Then we develop the narrative. What's the story around this topic? Ultimately, after we have our story, it has to get heard, right? So how do we deliver it? How do we publicize this information? What channels are we going to use? And then how do we measure our success? Now this refers to not programmatic success, but this is how well you've been heard. So this is more about the story getting out there, just to be clear on that. So looking a little deeper at defining our topic, we need to show, again, going back to what we talked about earlier, how Extension is growing our state, that lives, land economy, the brand promise connection. We've got to make sure that we're aligned with that. And then ultimately, do we have a practical research-based solution or information to offer? If the answer is no, then this is not an extension story. We need to think about our audience. So who needs to know this information? Who is affected? Why should they care? This tends to be pretty clear, but I would encourage you as you're thinking through this piece to think about other audiences that might benefit from the story as well. You may have to tweak the story a little bit to better appeal to a different audience, but it's certainly well worth your time if you can make a bigger splash. When you get into story development, this is the part I think that most people really, start to hesitate on. Go back to that story development worksheet. Let it help you tell your story. Again, these are those 4 points to an extension story: best people, partnerships that benefit North Carolina, hands-on education, and research-based resources. All right, characters and setting. I think it's pretty easy to say who the characters in a story are, but did you know that a character may not be a person? A character may be Extension as an organization. It may be the 4-H team in your county. It might be a partner. If you worked with the YMCA, the YMCA could be a character in your story. So think really clearly about who these characters are, and then think about their connection to the issue. We really didn't go much into setting here. People understand, your location, time, place in history, all of that. Everybody understands that part of setting, but setting is also the broader context. So if I am, for example, telling a story about improving health outcomes in the county, if I can convey a little bit of information about why that's important, what does it look like now? How many people are overweight? Or what is the rate of heart disease hospitalizations in your county? Whatever that information is that supports the need for your program, that's all part of the setting. Simply stating the challenge refers to just being clear about what the characters are trying to fix. What is it that is not working well that Extension has a solution for? And then why does it matter to that audience? If I'm talking to county commissioners, that answer is going to be a little bit different than if I'm talking to moms, for example. We want to highlight the benefits and impacts for the audience. So this is the what did we do and why was it important? This is what those outcomes and impacts that we talked about before. How do we make those important? How do we make those make sense to our audiences? I promised to skip over deliver and measure with just a couple of comments, but basically, when it comes to, I'm so sorry, this is Tug, everyone, meet Tug. When we think about telling our story, think about where that audience goes for information. So perhaps your story is best played out through social media, or maybe it would make a great topic for a radio station. You want to pitch to some journalists. Think about that ahead of time. And then also think about those internal channels. And remember that the College of Agriculture and Life Science and NC State Extension and Cooperative Extension at A&T all have communications channels that your story might be appropriate to tell through. So think of us as a media outlet that you can pitch to as well. And then measurement. When you tell a story, it's important to make sure that it's heard, because if it's not heard very well, perhaps there's things you can do differently. Or perhaps you shared your story through social media and you've discovered this is really more of an internal story. Perhaps I should be talking about it more through the newsletter. So you can change gears and sort of recycle that information as needed. So thinking about all of these ahead of time will set you up for that kind of success later on. All right, this is our link, just in summary. Please again check out those storytelling resources and let us know if you have any questions. This is where to find me, Julie Hayworth-Pierman, and Justin Moore, who is our Communications Director for NC State Extension. Thank you all. Hope this has been relatively painless and hope you enjoyed seeing Tug. She was certainly happy to be part of the program today. Take care, and I hope to meet you in person soon.